Okay, sorry, I was just looking at the bios very quickly. Because they're all friends, but you want to introduce them well. So to my right is Ananth Padmanabhan, CEO of HarperCollins India. Manisha Chaudhry is next to him. She built up a children's imprint called Pratham, which we are all very, very proud of. Because as we were talking about it just a few minutes ago, and we were saying that the pillar of that idea was to give access to books to children who wouldn't otherwise have access. So this is a really iconic person as far as I'm concerned. Ian de Toffoli, who runs, is it called Hydra? How would you?
I mean, it's the myth.
The Hydra, of course,
Hydra.
but how do
You pronounce it in French, Hydre.
Hydre, right? Hydre Edition. But he's also, which is a very, very specialist literary imprint, but he's also, he's probably the only PhD on this panel. And so an academic writer, he teaches at university, and he also runs this fabulous literary imprint. Rick Simonson, who's a regular, I think, at JLF, and it's always such a pleasure to meet him, who runs the fabulous Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, and I've been on a panel with him before, so it's always fun to talk to him. And I'll keep dropping things because I'm a really clumsy mod. Don't look at my points, Anand. Okay, sorry. I know we're being recorded, so I need to behave myself. So, resurgence of print, and the first thing I emailed them was, resurgence? Had print gone anywhere? Not to my knowledge. So of course, the nice thing was, big and small, we all agreed that resurgence is a bit of a, it's the sort of thing that you say in India, media has made the word, so it's sort of a myth, the whole thing about resurgence of print. I think we can all agree on that here. Print never went away, but there was this noise that had been created around digital, which for some reason felt like it was noise at the cost of print, but print was there, solid, quiet, and now we've come to a point where we're talking about print again, and how fabulous is that? So I want to really start with Rick. Rick is as a bookstore person, as an owner of a bookstore, an independent bookstore, in a lot of ways, the fact that we are again talking so much about print and that this panel exists, it's in a lot of ways that, you are probably the most affected by it. It's probably a sense of victory, that you might be experiencing, but at the same time, as we were talking before,
Yeah,
it's not a new idea for you.
No, I would say when you're in a bookshop, you're dealing with whatever you can in terms of being resourceful. And in the States, because there's such a range of smaller independent presses, a lot of the doubt around the print, the notion of print, was coming from the larger publishers, various factors at work. And we felt we would be able to find the books. But for me, in fact, it's been coming to India was a place to see the aspirational part of print still happening, that you would see people eager to try and print and publish and distribute more books. That's all, both on the popular level, but also our friend Naveen Kishore and the others are from Seagull Books, who maintain gorgeous books and also even catalogs and things, doing so from here, but with the books going around the world. But in a place like the US, it was watching the larger publishers especially put this doubt. That was partly because of the demise of some of the book chains. Suddenly books were not, they weren't printing as many and they weren't selling as many books. And then the strange dual role Amazon would play in both propagating the idea that they were the way to sell books, and they actually do sell books non-returnable in a non-returnable way, but also fostering the idea that there's a cheaper way, i.e. ebooks. And that, again, took some time to get worked through to where whatever ebooks we're going to do. So the printed part has never gone away, and now everything's showing from, even to the degree ebooks do still sell, they often derive a certain amount of the interest. People have to know the book exists. It's a sort of derivative of knowing there's a physical book that is driving that interest. And the publishers are actually doing more to support the physical existence of books, and especially the independent bookshops are getting better terms in all sorts of ways. And that's been part of it. And again, for all the high talk, it's just it's daily work to make it happen and to keep it going.
One of the things I was thinking as we were talking is that at lunch, we were all saying that gone are the days of people standing up when, when someone talks about how good a book smells or something like that and saying, oh, you book fetishists. And I'm so happy we're past that time because each one of us has a really good reason for saying that print should stay around, and it has nothing to do with fetishism. Manisha, your reason stands out for me as perhaps the most prominent one. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think what we were discussing earlier in connection with what we are supposed to talk about, for any first generation schoolgoer, the physicality of the book to my mind is very important, especially when you're in primary school. Purely because if you're ever going to develop a positive relationship with the printed word, it is going to be through a physical object rather than a screen. That could be my personal opinion, but I think even educational theory will bear me out that we ask children to play with sand for a reason. We give them paper to crumple for a reason. But I mean, even if you say that is a bit of a stretch, I think the other point that I wanted to make in that connection was that as a middle class parent or a person who's worried continuously about their children having too much screen time, when we are talking about first generation schoolgoers, why would we not have the same concern for those children who do not have access to books? So for me, those are the two sort of key reasons why I would say that, we all agree that digital is going to grow and it's as much part of our lives as our smartphones are, and it's changing how we read. We were talking about long form reading happening far less, and we're reading smaller bits on our phones and so on. But I think the introduction to the world of print through a physical book when you come to school, even if you don't have books at home, I think that it's absolutely critical that in primary school you get physical books. So that is, and I just wanted to make one little addition to the introduction that you gave me. You called me iconic. Thank you for that, but I am actually now running...
I'm allowed to say iconic.
Okay. Why should I dispute such a pleasant fact? But I am now running my own imprint called Manan Books, and it's called Manan Books because we really want children to cogitate over what they're reading. And I think something inherently about screen reading doesn't encourage that kind of cogitation. If we're talking about reflection and cogitation, I think that really having the book with you and developing a relationship with your dog-eared first book has something to do with how you're going to reflect upon what is in it.
Right. I think Rick said something interesting at lunch, that even when you have an e-book, it's like a virtual memory of a physical object. And I was just thinking that be that as it may, digital reading is going up. I mean, we are reading more on our smartphones and other devices, maybe not books, but other things. And, long form has also made a comeback because suddenly people are getting more used to the screens. So they're not that bothered about reading for a long time on the screen. So keeping all of that in mind, Ian, you said that when I asked you, was there any point that you were scared? With this noise around the digital. You said, yes, I was, and I still am. Why is that? Are we indulging in wishful thinking?
I'll have to answer this from my specific position. The publishing house I run in a small country in Europe, in Luxembourg, was based or was founded on something very specific. There was firstly, the publishing of theater plays. Because in the whole country, we had a country there's very few publishers in Luxembourg, and there was specifically no one for theater. Since I'm working at the university as an academic teacher and teach mostly contemporary European theater, I thought this is the moment where I need to start this business which is specialized in publishing plays. So, and I heard somebody now talking about the special relationship that one has to a book, to a printed book. It was very important for me that those plays that we published were really the books that, for example, directors or scenographers could work with. So that was their physical book. They were taking notes in it, etc. But now coming to your question, since this is a very specialized publishing house and it's not a big business, I'm constantly, clearly afraid of it running bankrupt because we don't sell enough books, because it's a specialized form, specialized literature that we sell. So I'm in constant search for public, of course. That's the work, the main work we do at the publishing house is getting in touch with the reader. But the intention is not to be more diverse or to open up to bigger markets or to publish fantasy novels, for example. I'll stay with what I do, and that's why I'm constantly afraid of being overrun by the big things, of course. But I need to do this because that was the clear intention from the start on, and at least somebody has to publish theater in Luxembourg. Yeah.
Big things, Ananth. That's your cue. But you are a CEO of a big brand, multinational publishing house, who's also an author. That's a rare thing, I believe. And I do believe that that also gives you a kind of different perspective. I'm sure it does. You can come to it from a completely different angle from many other CEOs who are not also knowledge producers from the core, as an author is. One of the things that I want to ask you is, a lot of us who are, Manisha a little while ago used the word periphery. I called you specialist. I'm this independent publishing house who sells 1,000 copies and feels very happy. Rick is an independent bookstore. I don't know how much of a change we can effect, even if we agree that that print is here to stay. But you can, in a sense. You have this big brand, you have a team, and you can make a difference. And I think that's exactly what you said as we were coming up on stage, that it's time to think ahead. Do you want to share what you were saying to us?
So, you're right in that there's not a resurgence in that. I don't think we should have a low threshold to say that we had estimated at some point in the past that digital will contribute to X or Y, and it might threaten stuff like that. It's a short history in India in the last 20 years. There were independent bookstores, then there were 10 years of chain stores, then online came on, but all along volumes have grown and stuff like that. The thing about, well, one is we are a large, I wouldn't say big or large or whatever, but still an independent publishing house. We have just a few imprints. We publish about 200 new books a year. We have about 1,000 titles in print. That's not large by any stretch of imagination in that sense. But in a country, especially like ours, which is divided by reach, affordability, economics, lack of libraries, languages, I don't think we would sit back and say that just viewing it from the prism of English language publishing can answer the questions that you just asked about reach and so on. So whether it's an independent publisher or not, we always operate, even for every one of our authors, whether it's 1,000 copy or 100,000 copy, is that we don't know who our reader is, we don't know where he is placed, whether he's buying it in print or electronic, whether if he can afford the book he can buy, what feedback he's giving us, and so we're constantly unhappy that any book could have sold a little more than we currently have sold. Yeah. And can that gap be bridged by just a few people who can afford to spend money on social media? No. It takes every Lit Fest, it takes every book event, it takes every mailer, every SMS post to get that one additional person try and buy the book that you want to buy. For a long time, just a few houses had the ability to influence readership in this country, and a few authors had most of the attention. Organically, there was it was not by design. But now, with just in the last 5 years, at least 5 homes coming afresh, investing in print publishing, as it were, and the explosive nature of what digital has done to India. I'm not talking e-books at all. Arguably 1 billion mobile phones, at least 100 million people who are regularly spending money, as in Jio has announced profits. So you have an ability to convert this estimated 50 million people into about 100 million people who at least buy one book every alternate month.
Right.
I think we shouldn't be happy with the fact that print is here or not, or whatever it is, whatever we saying, is that we think about 50 million people buy books, and there might be a couple of more which are in the unorganized, we don't know them. But there's an opportunity to push this to a 100 million. If the industry today is a $6 billion industry, and there are a lot of kids who still don't have access to school textbooks, we publish school textbooks, and I know how messy it is about getting a textbook of ours into a parent's bedside table to teach them at night. I think that $6 billion industry can actually be a $30 billion industry. 6 billion is just one of the houses in America. So and they only have 300 million people. So just by scale, I think we should believe there are no limitations and push the bar, every one of us, independent or big.
This is a question that the three of you could probably answer that I couldn't as an somewhere outside, but I would say coming from the US, which is not a great example of like being what we know, but I know that in the US, the publishers and booksellers of various kinds, sensing that uncertainty of where they were, actually do a lot of work together. Yeah. Big publishers and small publishers, and the bookstores with each other. They literally do a lot of back and forth, and a lot of, that's to help find the readers, both the people who read some but could read more, and to help find the newer readers. But how much of that happens here, or in what ways is it happening? I don't sense, from what I've known, the booksellers here don't help each other so much. And I don't know how much the publishers and the booksellers have, for all the adversarial, the business thing, still there's that joint purpose of putting books in people's hands, and how much do they do that? Because that is something that's sensed and being worked on in the US.
Actually, that's connected to what I wanted to ask you again. Do you think one of the ways in which we are going to perhaps, start getting to what you're talking about, doubling those print book sales, that in a sense, where we are with digital and what you were saying about smartphones and the fact that social media is so big now, in a sense, digital is going to play a big role in making that happen. I mean, of course. Okay. Right. Okay. Yes, speak into the mic, Ananth. So, is digital and online selling going to make the difference? So, in a sense, we're in this new ecosystem where there will be a collaboration between print supported by digital, just like Rick is suggesting that there will be more of a collaboration, I suppose, between publishers and booksellers. Because one of the places where I do see that happening is social media. How much we cross-market together now, which never used to happen earlier. I mean, somehow, bookstores will not have reviews of my books up on their notice boards, but every time I tweet out a review for my book and I say you can go to this bookstore and get it, they will retweet it. Amazon, if I tag Amazon, they will retweet it. So there's a lot of work happening together there.
In terms of reach, but to go to your first question, I think BookMark is the first of its kind in a way that actually brings us together. But it's more look back, hindsight, in retrospect, and some analytical conversations. But if you go to the BEA in America, which I go every summer, there is a libraries conference which publishers sponsor, want to talk to libraries. There are just subcategories of South Asian writing booksellers. There will be Christian booksellers who get together. There will be the indie publishers and indie booksellers who get together. I don't think, at the cost of her being critical, I don't think we as an industry come together to say, can we drive something better? We'd like to talk about it. We go back to our desks and become competitive. Our days are busy, as they say, in a way. But I don't think we get together to drive something to make it better. I know publishers don't even, we don't do that, to quickly answer your question. But I think digital from an ebook perspective, ebooks themselves are going quite nicely, but I think it's still, it's still the same reader of books who might choose an alternate format every once in a while. A pure digital only, which is an exercise in only the last 3-4 years, we've had somebody actually start a digital only publishing house here. They do reach people. Is that going to be a game changer in terms of selling more books? May or may not, but it's definitely a game changer in how many people you can reach.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was just telling them that ever since I put my ebooks on Juggernaut, and ever since they, you know, we do this thing with them where a new book comes out and they run a campaign that week, and I see my Amazon and Flipkart sales go up for that book that week, which is such a clear indicator that there's showrooming happening on Juggernaut, which is then transitioning into physical book sales, which is fabulous if that's the way it has to happen. Again, digital and print working together, you know. But Rick, you mentioned another thing about how things have gone more digital. How things have gone more digital for the book trade. Remember you were talking about how the experience has become more digital. The experience of selling books, the experience of interacting with each other. Do you want to talk about that?
Among booksellers or among the pub readers? Because the booksellers do, I mean, literally while I'm here in the US, counterparts have an annual gathering of sharing best practices, and that includes talking about books and business practices, sort of how we help each other. Coming from a point of when we were extremely vulnerable about 10 years ago. I mean, our segment was so endangered, we had to sort of figure out how we're going to survive, and everything from the language you use to how you do this and how you do that works. So there was that element to it, but it also was very book driven, people talking with passion about the books they like, and which is also something we, you know, that we engage in every day in the shop, in the bookshops. We're sort of out there doing that, and it's back and forth. Yeah. The people tell us what they like, and we have that exchange, and then oftentimes you're passing that on. The publishers don't get so much of that except, you know, in raw data, but to get even more the narrative behind some of that, it's lacking. I mean, again, it's the human part of this that animates us to do these things, and why, you know, why we love doing them, the books we read, and what it is to be given a book, you know, handed, and you read it and you go, well, you know, my goodness, then to want to share that with someone else. That's part of what drives it for those of us doing it. So
the human part, that's what you were saying, wasn't it?
I was saying that specifically for the relationship between a publisher and a bookshop. We, for example, launch every book we publish at a specific independent bookshop in Luxembourg City. And I was telling you while we were having lunch that this bookshop a few months ago was actually declaring bankruptcy, and through Facebook, since we are talking about social media as well, came such a cry of an outcry of solidarity for this independent bookshop when it declared bankruptcy. All the Luxembourgish writers were offering readings, free readings for a few days at a row in this bookshop, and it was saved actually through social media, through the digital world. The living, touchable bookshop was actually saved, and we continue doing our book launches there, and we work very closely with this guy who is reading, of course, all our books and talking to the clients about them, since he knows the writers, since he regularly invites the writers to signing sessions too, etc. He's counseling, he's giving good counsel to the clients to sell our books. I mean, we couldn't be more, we couldn't feel more privileged with this bookshop, of course.
Manisha, you're at the start of a new sort of startup. And in a lot of ways, what we were talking about earlier, let's not just be an echo chamber, and let's try to think ahead. What can we do next? What are you planning with Manan? How are you going to sort of work around the whole, you know, growing print, growing the access of children to print books, since you believe in it so much?
So I think we are all in different ways talking about the complementarity of the two, right?
Yeah.
We are all saying that we want each to drive the other in a manner that we simply get more people buying books, right? So, you know, since I'm working really with the bottom of the pyramid, my hope is that the work that I do is going to nurture generations of readers for the future.
Right.
And, you know, unless we, you know, whether it's in the education system or in publishing, primary school just gets short shrift because it's not sexy to talk about primary education. It's sexy to talk about the IITs and the IIMs and whatever else, whereas the real crisis of learning is there at primary school.
Yeah.
And it's really a no-brainer that not enough print books in the mother tongues is one of the reasons why there is low fluency and therefore low educational achievement and poor language acquisition. So we really intend to work with children who are first generation schoolgoers. Even more than that, we intend to work with teachers. Teachers who teach in government schools whose classrooms have changed because of migration patterns within the country. The same classroom may have 5 languages today, which it didn't earlier. There's no material for them to know how to handle such a class. You know, all the teacher trainings are not geared to this new classroom at all. So, you know, we really want to publish for the first gatekeepers, you know, who are the first generation schoolgoers' parents, as well as those teachers who are teaching these children who've come to school for the first time with this big hope that education is going to change their lives. So I think we will continue to sort of work with the bottom of the pyramid because we believe it's important. And we really believe that the 372 million odd children who are in the 0 to 14 age group today are going to grow up and buy books from HarperCollins and Yoda and your publishing house and others.
Yeah,
so,
and the bottom of the pyramid is the most important part. So, yeah. Do I have 10 more minutes before I, okay. Oh yeah, that is the, okay. I'm just sort of, before I open it up, because I'm sure there are questions, I want to ask you a fun thing, which we were doing at lunch, and Ananth will have to think about it really quickly though. So, a word that the noise around digital made us really hate. Mine was discoverability. What's yours?
Scale. Scale. I don't like the word scale because it
Rick?
hides a lot of sins.
Rick?
Well, I used to like the word Kindle, but
oh, come on.
that was a word that got used. Now, and I can't say I don't like it, but platform was the word I was using.
Platform, yeah. And?
I can't even pronounce mine.
I'll help you with that.
But let me just quickly contextualize this. I have a brother-in-law who's working at a very big, how do you call them in English, counseling firm. Is that the? No, that's not the right word. Is it the right word? I mean, is a big lawyer, McKinsey, top dog.
Consultant.
Yeah, consultants. That was the word I was looking for. And when I was starting this small business of mine, he was, of course, making fun of me all the time. And he said, well, let me give you a few tricks to improve your business. And one of the first was, let me give you a few tricks to improve your market competitiveness. And I said, okay, let's immediately stop here. I hate this word.
What about yours?
Engagement.
I know.
I hate it.
I know. What does it even mean? That's the thing we said at lunch, that we really don't know what these words mean anymore. Because, I mean, we all have the original meaning in mind, but it's gone on to...
I'm sure there's a science to it.
Yes,
but,
sure.
But it's a very annoying
No,
word.
don't say science. That gives it more importance than we want to give.
What I'm saying, I hate that word. Yeah, it comes up very often.
Yeah. I think we need to rethink and not use these words as loosely as they've been used. The words stand, of course, but... So with that, questions? Oh, come on, we haven't answered we haven't, yeah.
Actually, I do not know whom to direct this question to exactly, but when we discuss about digital media versus print media, one of the factors which was always been in my favor for print books was the market of second-hand books. So I do not know the legal aspect behind it, but one of the things I liked was reading second-hand books, be it from my friends who I borrowed from, and there were certain, in Delhi there are several markets where you can just go and buy books, not on the basis of the title of the book, but on the basis of weight also, like 6 books per kg, something like that. I've actually seen that, like 10 rupees book, 20 rupees books, and going through them and finding some treasure. Like I found Harry Potter and Order of Phoenix for 40, 50 rupees at one time. That was one of the best days for me. Yeah. So I do not know, but that is one thing which we do not find in digital world, right? Like if you buy a Kindle book, you cannot share as such. So is there anything being done on that side? Any thought process that is going behind that? How we can, capitalize on that, expand on that? Just any rough idea, that's it.
Second-hand books? Does anyone? So your question is anyone taking the whole second-hand books
because it's a
movement further? Well, in the morning we had that, fabulous discussion which Urvashi moderated, and there was the walking book fairs. So, and there's books on metro and all of that, but anyone?
The access to them is because of digital listing. People certainly have access to the printed secondhand books. It becomes a kind of a different market for what the prices are going to be for those books. But for those dealers who thought they had something worth a certain value, now the fact that people can get the books all over, but they certainly does make, again, the printed version of things available, and keeps some things findable that weren't probably going to be found so easily before.
You're so close to using discoverability.
I know. Findable was close. Findable was close.
Anyone else? Any other question? Yes, gentlemen.
This question is pointed to you. You're saying that in the last 10 years that you've seen a delta increase in terms of sale of books that's happening, out there. But commensurate to the sale of digital, how's the growth been? Is the sale of digital books, far more greater year after year than the print, or has the print slowly outbeaten the digital sale that's happening out here?
No, print has always been larger than digital.
Okay.
Digital is about 10% of print at the moment.
Okay.
And print itself is growing at least at about 10 to 12% year on year.
Okay. Now, the next question is also to you. Have we seen an emergence of a publishing house, in the last decade, other than Penguin and HarperCollins that's happened out here in India? Anybody who's kind of really become big into the world?
Well, there are many publishing houses. I wouldn't use the word whether they're big or small or whatever it is. Ultimately, it's the power of your idea, right? And that's what people buy. If you don't want to buy one of our authors, I can't shove it down to you to read it. But there have been at least 5 or 6 big homes that have, big imprints that have made an impact on the readers. Okay. And they published very good books. And again, it's not restricted to Penguin and HarperCollins are English language dominant publishing homes. But there's a lot happening across the country in languages and in regional languages. DC Books for Kerala alone is much larger than some English language homes that I can't name now. Okay. But the data is out there. I just don't want to. So there's a lot happening in publishing in India. Just a walk through the children's pavilion at something like a World Book Fair will tell you how much we don't know about what's happening in the children's publishing space. Okay. Stuff like that, what she was talking about, is a challenge for us, even in Collins Learning, which is our textbook division. We've just launched 2 pre-primary courses, kindergarten courses. One is called Easy Learning, one is called Ready Study Go. I think there's a big gap in English language and numeracy learning for our children here. Whether it's to the formal pattern, whether it's to Montessori, whether it's homeschooling, there's not enough books of high quality that can make the future buyer or consumer of content. Let's just know the content. Book, as we know, is now printed and bound. The future is different. We might not even be touching our phones anymore. It'll be voice. It'll be whatever, iris. Yeah, it might be. It might be, you go around to the chip. So I don't know. So as a consumer of content, there's a lot of stuff that is happening. A lot we don't know about.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Mary.
I'm curious about the title of this session, The Resurgence of Print, and I'm just wondering if at any point did it die? You're saying that it's resurging. And the other thing I'm also curious about is that as publishers, if you had the same book, which was in the form of an e-book or a print book, would it matter to you if you were to sell quantities and even more in the digital, if not the print? Does it actually matter to you whether it's in the print or it's in digital form, the book itself?
Well, I just want to answer the first question. We started by saying exactly what you said, that we're not going to even deal with resurgence because print didn't go anywhere. Second part of the question, Manisha, do you want to reiterate what you said about why print books are important?
No, so I think it would really depend on, who your target audience is, because I made a particular point for very young children. I thought it was very important for them to have print books to begin with, and they need to reach a stage where they can actually choose whether they wish to read in print and digital. But to get them to that stage, I think it's important for them to climb the ladder, and so to speak, if it is indeed a linear ladder, that they first need to be exposed to print books and therefore begin to be fluent readers and then buy digital books or whatever. So I think as a publishing house, if my book was being read and there was revenue coming in, I think I would be fine with both, depending on the nature of the book, really.
Yeah. And some of what we were saying, I think, was about how we are all thinking more and more now in terms of digital and print collaborating and sort of clumping each other up, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk?
Yeah. No, publishing is format agnostic from our perspective, as long as you consume more. But there's one question that you asked about: at what point did it spike? So there was a tipping point, up to a point when publishers knew hardback fiction and hardback non-fiction of the literary kind, and that was a known entity, and it had followed a pattern, until paperback fiction in the sub 100 and sub 200. That's when which brought a whole new audience. So today, if you're looking at a bestseller list where books are selling in hundreds of thousands, because some publishers and some authors took that risk to first publish campus literature at 99, to publish romance at 150. That brought in a whole new audience, which at that point, large publishing houses were turning their nose against. So internationally, beach reads or handbag reads or campus literature always happened. There was Janet Daly or whoever, you can name all of them, alongside any Penguin classic. But here, we turned the other way. We were obsessed with the great Indian novel and this Indian writing in English business, which stopped a lot of commercial fiction from happening. So my generation, which, I read Anurag Mathu's Inscrutable Americans, perfectly normal. I read Shobha Day. And then we stopped looking at it once one of us won the Booker Prize and we wanted to publish this great novel. We stopped publishing a lot of mass market fiction. And Indian readers were consuming Jeffrey Archer and Desmond Bagley and Wilbur Smith by the truckloads. And we were all very happy. But we didn't see the fact that Indian writers could have done that too, if they had been published and mentored and priced at the right point. It took the last 10 years for that to explode. So today, if you have more people buying books, it's because some writers took the risk, and even more, some publishers took the risk to publish that novel. I'm not talking quality at all, that is a subjective matter. But accessible books in the categories that people want to read will what grow markets. We shouldn't be snobbish about what we will and we won't publish.
One of the things, since you're talking about pricing as well, Ananth, I want to come back and ask you another question since we do have time. One of the things that some of the people have flagged about this whole wishful thinking idea is that the problem, the fact that, you're just engaging in wishful thinking when you think print is back. One of the things they talk about is that ebook pricing is the big problem. If ebooks were not priced as high as they are, ebooks would be right back in the game. Do you think there's any truth to that at all?
Well, ebooks are not expensive, actually. I bought Dan Brown at $1.
A lot of people are...
So the reseller is making that difference.
Yeah.
But yes, can ebooks be cheaper than they are so that they can reach more people? It applies if the reader is making that choice to buy a cheaper version. I think we don't have enough readers.
Right.
Then it's the question of buying a device to read it and then leveraging that.
Right. I think I didn't mean expensive, but even at the price that they're available at, I think there's always this discussion that, oh, ebooks don't need any investment, so they should be even.
So I'll give you a contrary example.
Yeah.
In the initial stages when Flipkart used to start, had an ebook store, and they shut the ebook store because they couldn't compete against the technology requirement. Every month we would see returns against ebooks. That's because people chose the cheapest version and then waited for it to be delivered home. It didn't come. They called customer service to say, why didn't this come? They said, no, you ordered an ebook which is not going to be delivered to you. It should have been delivered on your device. So one of the reasons ebooks are not as large as they are is publishers are grappling with the pricing of it, but are not educating audiences enough to go buy it, to read it. There isn't an e-road show. There's still a lot of audience who don't know what an ebook means.
Right. Gosh,
Yes.
who would have thought of that?
No.
Also, this whole thing about, another thing people are bringing up is, oh, but have you tracked how many ebook purchasers have now transitioned to audiobooks or e-subscription services? Is there any truth to that?
I don't know, but I was
Areas like audio are they're fairly minor. I was just sitting here thinking about why we're all here at this festival, and we're talking about digital, we're talking about print. Then there's the oral, which is hearing. I mean, I was thinking also of Naveen's talk about the physicality of what translation is. We come and hear books described, talked about, read from, and then we undertake the act of reading them. Physically, we go get the book and then we read them. And that's also part of it. I work in a bookstore that has been presenting authors reading, and as Ian talked about the writers coming to read at this shop in Luxembourg, there's that part of hearing the books read from, and it could be also by audio or other forms, but it literally is that part, and then you go, the act of reading, the physically reading it, is a real part of, I think, of how people come to books in all the ways. And again, that's what this festival, you hear books talked of and read from, and then you go in that bookstore over there and watch the books getting bought and then presumably read. In
the US, of course, Amazon is opening bookstores now.
Yeah, this has also been part of the interesting thing, because Amazon can they can make enormous steps that you could call mistakes, or they would say it's strategic. But after devaluing the idea of a bookshop and kind of like who needs to go somewhere to do that when it can be delivered, they've undertaken the opening of physical bookshops, which I assume will start working their way outside the US. But so far, there's strange entities as bookshops, and again, they're trying to get data and get you in to their memberships and things. But the books, they're not even, no regular bookshop can afford the space that they're occupying. They're very high rent areas. But it sort of does validate, A, the physical book, and B, the places to go find them. And so that's part of, that was part of the noise for a good 15 to 20 years. It's like, I would see people and they'd say, oh, you're still here, meaning they know I work in a bookstore, and they'd read enough of the media noise that we were assumed, now they're the other way, now we're resurging. So
yeah,
I was like,
now
oh, God,
we're in the era of resurgence.
If you listen to that stuff, you get caught, you can get caught in it, and I think all of us here don't really listen to that stuff that much, but there is that sort of part of the public.
Manisha.
Just in continuation with what you're saying, I mean, if you're looking at the book in various forms as a multisensorial experience, if we even go back to reading acquisition, I think many more Indians learned Hindi because of same language subtitling in Chitrahar. If you remember, the Hindi ticker which used to come below the song, that taught Hindi to many, many more non-Hindi speakers than any government program did. So this whole thing about audiobooks and reading together is a very important thing. One of the earlier panels today was talking about audiobooks and what it does. So I think, if you're talking about complementarity and whether it's juggernaut, your e-titles and that pushing up your physical sales, or audiobooks actually driving people to the physical book, a lot of tie-ups in the NGO sector where community radio is being used to read out small books, and the children actually have the books, and that actually helps them to learn to read quicker and with greater pleasure. So I think that those are the kind of complementarities which we have to look at the very basic level as well, just to add to whatever everybody else
I find
is.
I read Freud better when I'm listening to an audio book of his. I've never been able to finish any of the books when I'm reading them. Sorry, something Freudian in that, but yeah, Ian.
Yeah, can I add something to this, since you started a topic that is very dear to me, and it's quite funny, the language topic, how a small country in Europe like Luxembourg and a huge country like India have, let's not overdo it, but have something in common, is this question of the language. You know that, or maybe not, I don't think so, that in Luxembourg actually nobody speaks Luxembourgish. That's the language we speak at home with the families, but the official language is French and German. And our newspapers are all in French and in German. There's not a single article in Luxembourgish. But literature in Luxembourgish language has always existed, was very minor at a certain time, and in the 80s became more popular. And books were more and more published in Luxembourgish. And at that time, the first grammar and writing, grammar and, how do you say, orthography? That's not orthography. No, them. No, not autobiographies, but grammar and words. Yes, dictionaries, kind of dictionaries, became important for people to know how to use this language. Nowadays, 80% of the Luxembourgish population doesn't know how to write the language correctly, but learns how to write it through literature, reading books and wondering about how those words are finally written down. And there was something very important. This rise of a language that was commonly used for everyday communication to a literature language, to a language that has enough literature possibilities, let's say, that is developable as a literary language. And that happened through reading and, of course, a little bit through hearing as well, because the first stories told or recorded in Luxembourgish, even if it was common German fairy tales, were translated and recorded on audio tapes and read to children. That made an impact.
I think you're absolutely right to draw parallels between that ecosystem and ours, except in our case, then it's like many languages which are going through that, but absolutely spot on, I think. Do you want to add something? I wanted to go back to the audience. Sorry, we started talking again, but any more questions? Back there, the gentleman with the... Yeah.
Yes, I've just got a brief question about, we have this question of globalization, which has sort of taken over the world, and in response to that, in many areas, food and other artistic forms, you see a return back to localism, where the local community and are valuing their own artistic visionaries from their own society. And I'm just wondering if maybe one of the values of a printed book is that it's actually limited in distribution. Could you maybe comment on ways that local communities can maybe create literary communities to sort of promote a different model of how we deal with books and ideas?
Rick, has Shop Local worked for books? It's worked for food. Shop Local, the Shop Local movement, which is big in the States.
Well, certainly, yeah, on the level of commerce. I mean, one of the things, I'm trying to, if I've heard right, or I'm trying to, is we sell books locally published, as well as books internationally or multinationally published. And I like it's both. It's also, even when we're talking about what societies or cultures are, it's gotten a lot more mixed, or what, in the United States is really tricky right now, who thinks whose culture is what. It's a very live subject, but the truth is it's much more diverse than has sometimes been historically presented. So I find that there's room for both, the very local and the near and the far. And yeah.
Yeah, I think Manisha would.
Actually, I'd just like to share an interesting example of how things travel both ways. I did a project with tribal languages when I was at Pratham Books, and I'm in the throes of probably doing another one where many of the tribal languages don't even have a script, but because those children are coming to school for the first time, the project was entirely based on creating the first books for those children who are coming to school for the first time in tribal languages using an official script. So when we did that, I mean, it was really a sort of, we talk about the oral tradition, so it was the oral tradition which needed to be in print so that those children got back their sense of self, because when they came to school they were told that they didn't understand anything because they had a different home language, and what the medium of instruction in that state was something different. So they couldn't even ask for water. So if they couldn't even ask for water, the teacher very often assumed that they were stupid because, you know, they don't even know something as basic as asking for water. So, you know, that kind of bridge material which does this, which kind of brings into print those spoken languages, those bolis, you know, the difference between bhasha and boli. Yeah. This whole politics of language is not something that you can get away from if you're going to, you know, talk about different formats, and if you're going to talk about education. It keeps coming up again.
Yeah, it doesn't get more local than that. I was thinking of the film Newton, where the teacher says exactly this, isn't it? What you're saying, it's like art imitating life, of course. Yeah, do you want to add to that?
I think there's a lot of opportunity when we're working with women's groups, and when they're talking about public health and sexual health, and you identify a woman sarpanch who will influence the women in the locality about, even if it's like micro-banking or microfinance or whatever. I think the government is, unfortunately, the government is not doing enough at all. There are no libraries, there's no distribution of literature, they don't use available communities to make books mandatory. You can go to a ration shop and buy subsidized sugar, but why can't you buy subsidized books? I'm sure if you ask publishers to partner, they would partner. It's just that books are not top of mind at all. It's assumed that if you have a mother tongue and you speak, that's enough.
I think, you know, at the cost of sounding like I'm making a very sweeping generalization, the moment an idea like this goes into the hands of the government, it becomes totally instrumentalist. It becomes like hum do hamare do, family planning, let's use street plays to spread message X or Y, and then the sort of dynamic nature of that art form or whatever just collapses. You know,
so that's another thing to do for the future. As a community, you know, petition the government to take on some of these ideas, but not in this instrumentalist manner. I mean,
no, and I mean, I think there perhaps digital media has a very seminal role to play, where it could actually change discourses around some of these things, to say that if everybody could come onto the platform which Rick hates, and, you know, at least put forth their views about campaign X or campaign Y or whatever, I'm sure that there's an opportunity there.
Because even the government wants to look good on social media, right? Which is the strength of it. There was another question here. Do you want to just ask? And yeah, you're right here. So.
Good afternoon, dignitaries. Ma'am, I have a question for you. You spoke about tribal languages. We have the northeast of India, the seven sisters, right? So each and every state of northeast has a lot of tribals amongst them. Nagaland itself has n number of them. So what sort of literature has been created for the various tribals of northeast of India? And so how much of books, of course, I really differ how much of internet connection is there in Northeast. So again, is print also very viable in the Northeast?
Or in languages, in the languages of the Northeast.
No, so actually the Northeast has, yeah, like many people from the Northeast would testify, there's a lot of local language publishing that does happen, but which we don't always come to know about. But you know, if you're talking about whether enough literature is published, you know, I wouldn't have access to
So ma'am, what sort of tribals are you working on? Which part of the country? Which tribals are you working on?
I don't work for tribals in general. I was talking about a particular project in Odisha where I worked with 4 tribal languages to create books for children, the very first books in those languages.
A lot of Northeast states are English speaking also. right? So what sort of a literature is there? I mean, we're talking about print, right?
Mary is sitting right here,
Yeah,
2 rows behind.
Should,
she knows more
talk to
about
Mary
books
Therese
and publishing.
Kurkalang. She will tell you everything you need to know
should have a
about what's
conversation with
happening or should happen in the Northeast languages. But I want to be right on time. Am I right on time? Yeah. Almost. So, last word to Ian, because in this last bit you've kept quiet, and then we finish it. Inspirational stuff, Ian.
Oh, no, no. Oh, yeah, last word. I found it's not orthography, the word, that's spelling in English.
Okay, no, stop.
I found it. I'm not totally used to giving speeches in English, so I have to think.
You've done wonderfully, and thank you all for being such a, got to use your bad word, engaged audience. And in this case, I have used it well. And thank you, speakers. This has been fabulous. I hope you're going back with some solid things that we want to do, apart from talking to each other, not just at book forums. Exactly. I'm going to call you next week, Ananth. Thank you all.